The millionaire CEO was dining alone until he saw his ex-wife with 4 identical children, begging for money on the sidewalk. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Maxwell Thornton swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, staring absently at the panoramic view of New York City from the exclusive restaurant on the 65th floor. The twinkling lights below seemed to mock him, each one representing a life with purpose, with connection, while he sat alone at a table meant for 2. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Thornton?" the waiter asked, hovering respectfully. "No, that's all," Maxwell replied, not bothering to look up. The waiter nodded and retreated, leaving Maxwell to his solitude, a state he had grown accustomed to over the past 6 years. At 42, he had built Thornton Enterprises into a financial empire that spanned 3 continents. His net worth exceeded $11 billion. By all measurable standards, Maxwell Thornton had succeeded beyond imagination. Yet as he sipped his 30-year-old scotch, he felt the familiar emptiness spreading through his chest. The same hollowness that greeted him each morning in his penthouse and followed him to his corner office with its imposing mahogany desk. His phone buzzed. Another message from Wallace, his identical twin brother and co-CEO. "The Singapore deal is locked. 8 figures. Celebrate, brother." Maxwell didn't reply. Another deal. Another billion. The numbers had lost their meaning years ago. His mind drifted, as it often did in these quiet moments, to Victoria. Her smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, how she used to run her fingers through his hair when he was stressed. 6 years since their divorce, and still the wound felt fresh. "We want different things, Max," she had said that final day. "You want an empire. I just want a life." He had let her walk away, convinced that his ambition, his vision for Thornton Enterprises, was worth the sacrifice. Now, surrounded by everything money could buy, he wondered if it had been the greatest mistake of his life. A commotion outside the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows caught his attention. On the street below, a small crowd had gathered. From his elevated position, Maxwell could see a woman with a cardboard sign, her shoulders hunched against the cold autumn wind. Something about her posture, the tilt of her head, seemed hauntingly familiar. Curious, Maxwell moved closer to the window, squinting to see better in the dimming evening light. The woman turned slightly and his heart stopped. Victoria, his ex-wife, was on the street corner asking for money. Her once lustrous brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes worn but clean. But what truly froze Maxwell in place wasn't Victoria's presence. It was the 4 small boys clustered around her, no more than 5 years old, identical in every way, identical to him. 4 perfect miniature versions of Maxwell himself, with his sharp jawline, his dark hair, his piercing blue eyes. 4 children who could only have been born after their divorce, yet bore his unmistakable features. The crystal tumbler slipped from Maxwell's hand, shattering on the polished floor. He barely noticed the commotion as waiters rushed to clean up the mess. His eyes remained fixed on the street below, on Victoria and the 4 boys. His sons. The sons he never knew existed. Maxwell abandoned his half-eaten dinner, leaving a $100 bill on the table as he rushed toward the elevator. His heart hammered against his ribs. The image of those 4 identical faces burned into his mind. "Sir, your coat," a waiter called after him, but Maxwell was already gone. The descent from the 65th floor felt eternal. Maxwell loosened his tie, struggling to breathe as questions flooded his mind. How could Victoria have hidden this from him? 4 children, his children, living on the streets while he accumulated billions. When the elevator doors finally opened, Maxwell sprinted through the lobby and out into the crisp October evening. He scanned the street frantically, terrified she might have disappeared. Then he spotted them half a block away. Victoria kneeling beside one of the boys, adjusting his worn jacket. "Victoria," Maxwell called, his voice breaking. She froze, her body tensing visibly before she slowly turned to face him. When their eyes met, Maxwell saw a flurry of emotions cross her face: shock, fear, and something that looked like resignation. Max, she whispered, instinctively drawing the boys closer to her. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. 4 perfect miniature versions of himself looked up at him with curious blue eyes. One of them, slightly taller than the others, stepped slightly forward, his small chin raised in a protective gesture Maxwell recognized from his own childhood. "Are you okay, Mommy?" the boy asked, his eyes never leaving Maxwell. "Yes, Jaden," Victoria replied softly. "This is an old friend." Maxwell couldn't tear his eyes away from the children. "They're mine," he said. It wasn't a question. Victoria's expression hardened. "We should talk somewhere else." "How old are they?" Maxwell demanded, unable to contain himself. 5, she answered, her voice barely audible. 5 years. The math wasn't difficult. Victoria must have been pregnant when they divorced, when he had signed the papers without a second thought, eager to focus on expanding Thornton Enterprises. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked with emotion. Victoria glanced at the boys who were watching this exchange with confusion. "Not here, Max." "Mommy, I'm hungry," one of the smaller boys said, tugging at her coat. The simple statement hit Maxwell like a physical blow. His sons were hungry while he dined on Wagyu beef and expensive scotch. "Come with me," he said. "All of you, please." Victoria hesitated, uncertainty written across her features. Maxwell saw the pride warring with practicality in her eyes. "Just dinner," he added softly, "and then we'll talk." After what felt like an eternity, Victoria nodded. "Okay," she said, gathering the boys closer. "Just dinner." As Maxwell hailed a taxi, one of the boys, not Jaden, but another with a curious glint in his eye, looked up at him. "You look like us," the boy said simply. Maxwell's throat tightened as he met the child's gaze. "Yes," he managed to reply. "I suppose I do." Maxwell led Victoria and the Quadruplets to a small family restaurant 2 blocks away. He had instinctively started toward his usual high-end establishments before catching Victoria's warning glance and redirecting to somewhere more appropriate. Now seated in a corner booth with worn vinyl seats, Maxwell could barely focus on the menu in his hands. The 4 boys, Jaden, Wesley, Parker, and Bryce, sat across from him, devouring plates of spaghetti with the enthusiasm only hungry children could muster. Victoria sat beside them, barely touching her own food, her eyes constantly darting between Maxwell and her sons. "They're good eaters," Maxwell said awkwardly, searching for anything to break the tension. Victoria's lips twitched into a small smile despite herself. "They're growing boys." Jaden, the protective one, kept watching Maxwell suspiciously while methodically twirling pasta around his fork. Wesley, whom Maxwell was learning was the analytical one, studied Maxwell's expensive watch with obvious curiosity. Parker, the dreamer, seemed lost in his own world, humming softly while eating. And Bryce, the quiet observer, hadn't taken his eyes off Maxwell's face since they sat down. "Why do you look like us?" Bryce finally asked, his small voice cutting through the strained silence. Victoria paled. "Bryce, remember what we talked about asking personal questions?" Maxwell leaned forward slightly. "It's okay," he said gently. "Sometimes people look alike by coincidence." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but Victoria's grateful glance told him it was the right move for now. "Boys," Victoria suddenly said, "would you like ice cream for dessert?" The question successfully diverted the children's attention, and soon the waitress was taking their enthusiastic orders. When she left, Victoria turned to Maxwell. 5 minutes, she whispered. "I'll take them to see the fish tank by the entrance. That should give us time to talk." True to her word, after ice cream arrived and was quickly devoured, Victoria guided the Quadruplets to the large aquarium at the front of the restaurant. Maxwell watched them go, his heart clenching at the sight of his sons pressing their small hands against the glass, pointing excitedly at colorful fish. Victoria slipped back into the booth, her expression guarded. "Ask what you need to ask." "When did you find out you were pregnant?" Maxwell began, his voice low. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. And you didn't think I deserved to know? Victoria's eyes flashed. You made it abundantly clear what your priorities were, Max. The day we signed those papers, you were on the phone closing a deal before the ink was dry. That doesn't justify keeping my children from me, he countered, struggling to keep his voice down. I called your office, Victoria said, surprising him. 3 times. Your assistant said you were too busy to take personal calls. After the 3rd time, I decided our children wouldn't spend their lives being too personal for your schedule. Maxwell felt as if he'd been punched. He remembered his old assistant, the one who'd protected his time zealously during the company's expansion phase. I never got those messages, he said quietly. Victoria's expression softened slightly. Would it have mattered? You were building an empire, Max. That was always your dream, not a family. You don't know what I would have chosen, Maxwell said, his voice rough with emotion. Don't I? She sighed, glancing at the boys. When I found out they were quadruplets, I was terrified. I knew I'd need help, support. But I also knew what it would mean to tell you. You'd either reject us completely or try to control everything the way you always did with the business. Maxwell wanted to deny it, but couldn't. Control was his safety net, his way of ensuring success. They're my sons, Victoria. I've lost 5 years with them. And whose fault is that? She shot back, then immediately closed her eyes, regaining composure. I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. Maxwell looked at the 4 small boys, still fascinated by the tropical fish. What are their names? Tell me about them. For the first time, Victoria's expression warmed. Jaden is the oldest by 2 minutes. He's my little protector. Wesley is the thinker, always asking why about everything. Parker lives in his imagination. And Bryce? She smiled fondly. Bryce notices everything. I want to know them, Maxwell said firmly. All of them. I want to be their father. Victoria studied him. This isn't about writing checks, Max. Being a father means showing up day after day. I know, he said. And I will. Before Victoria could respond, the boys rushed back to the table, full of excitement about a pufferfish they'd spotted. We should go, Victoria said, gathering her worn purse. It's past their bedtime. Tomorrow, Maxwell said quickly. Central Park, by the Bethesda fountain. 2 o'clock. Please, Victoria. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. We'll see. As they left, Bryce turned back, his blue eyes, so like Maxwell's own, fixing on him with uncanny perception. Bye, the boy said softly, raising a small hand in farewell. Goodbye, Bryce, Maxwell replied, his voice thick with emotion. I'll see you tomorrow. Maxwell arrived at Bethesda Fountain an hour early, pacing nervously around the iconic Central Park landmark. He had barely slept, his mind racing with images of 4 identical boys who shared his DNA. During the night, he'd researched everything he could about raising children, about quadruplets specifically, about how to connect with kids who didn't know you were their father. The morning had been a flurry of activity. He'd canceled 3 meetings, ignoring Wallace's increasingly irate messages. For the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Thornton had put business second. When 2 o'clock approached, Maxwell found himself holding his breath, scanning every path for Victoria and the boys. What if she didn't come? What if she'd changed? Her mind? The thought sent a wave of panic through him. Then he saw them, 5 figures approaching from the east path. Victoria looked different in daylight, her brown hair catching golden highlights from the sun. She wore simple jeans and a faded sweater, but carried herself with the same quiet dignity he remembered. The boys bounded ahead of her, matching blue jackets making them look like a small coordinated team. You came, Maxwell breathed when they reached him. Victoria nodded, a tentative smile touching her lips. I promised we would. The boys stared, up at him with varying expressions. Jaden stood slightly in front of the others, his protective instinct on display. Wesley adjusted his small glasses, studying Maxwell like a science experiment. Parker bounced on his toes, clearly excited for whatever adventure the park might offer. And Bryce, quiet, observant Bryce, simply tilted his head as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Boys," Victoria said gently, "this is Mr. Thornton. He's going to spend some time with us today." "You can call me Maxwell," he offered, crouching down to their level. "Or just Max if you prefer." "Are you rich?" Wesley asked bluntly. "You have an expensive watch." "Wesley," Victoria admonished, but Maxwell laughed. "Yes, I am," he answered honestly. "But that's not the most important thing about me." "What is?" Parker asked, wide-eyed. Maxwell hesitated, caught off guard by the simple question. What was the most important thing about him? For years he would have said his business acumen, his success. Now, looking at these four little faces, he knew the answer had changed forever. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. "Maybe you guys can help me." That seemed to satisfy them for the moment. Maxwell stood, meeting Victoria's surprised gaze. He hadn't planned to be so candid, but something about these children made him want to be better, more authentic. "What would you like to do today?" he asked the group. "Boats!" Parker exclaimed immediately, pointing to the small rental rowboats on the lake. "Carousel," Wesley countered. "Ice cream," suggested Bryce quietly. "The zoo has tigers," Jaden added, speaking directly to Maxwell for the first time. Victoria looked apologetic. "They rarely agree on anything." "Then we'll do it all," Maxwell decided. "We have all afternoon." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. They rented a rowboat, Maxwell's expensive suit getting splashed as he awkwardly maneuvered the oars while four excited boys pointed at ducks and nearly tipped them over twice. They rode the carousel, the boys choosing different animals while Maxwell and Victoria stood side by side watching. "They seem happy," Maxwell observed. Victoria nodded. "They're resilient children. Things haven't been easy these past few years, but they find joy everywhere." "What happened, Victoria?" he asked quietly. "Last I heard you were working at that design firm." She kept her eyes on the children, spinning by on painted horses. "Life happened, Max. I was managing okay at first. My parents helped with the boys. Then they died in that car accident 3 years ago. Without their support, I couldn't keep up with childcare costs and work full-time. I lost my job, then our apartment. We've been staying in shelters, moving around." Maxwell felt a stab of guilt so intense it nearly doubled him over. "Why didn't you contact me then?" "Pride," she admitted. "Anger, maybe. And fear that you'd take them from me. They're all I have." Before Maxwell could respond, the carousel stopped and the boys rushed back to them, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Ice cream now?" Bryce reminded them, his serious expression making Maxwell smile. As they walked toward the ice cream vendor, Bryce unexpectedly slipped his small hand into Maxwell's. The simple gesture sent a jolt through Maxwell's entire body. Connection, trust, the weight of a child's hand in his own. "I like your tie," Bryce said matter-of-factly. "Blue is my favorite color." "Mine too," Maxwell replied, his voice suddenly hoarse with emotion. When they reached the ice cream cart, the boys debated their choices with the seriousness of corporate negotiations. Finally settled with their cones, they found a bench near the fountain. "Do you have kids?" Wesley asked Maxwell between licks of chocolate ice cream. Maxwell glanced at Victoria, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "No," he answered carefully. "I don't." "That's sad," Parker declared. "Everyone should have kids. They're fun." "Yes," Maxwell agreed, his throat tight. "I'm beginning to see that." As the afternoon light began to fade, Victoria reluctantly announced it was time to leave. The boys protested, but their drooping eyelids betrayed their exhaustion. "Can we see Max again?" Parker asked, yawning. Victoria looked at Maxwell, a question in her eyes. "I'd like that very much," Maxwell said. "If it's okay with your mom." "We'll see," Victoria replied. But her smile held more warmth than before. As they prepared to part ways, Jaden, who had remained watchful and reserved all afternoon, suddenly approached Maxwell. "Thanks for the ice cream," he said solemnly, offering his small hand for a shake. Maxwell shook it gently, recognizing the gesture for what it was. The first tentative step toward acceptance. You're welcome, Jaden. Thank you for spending the day with me. Maxwell sat in his office the following morning, staring blankly at spreadsheets that would normally command his full attention. The quarterly projections for Thornton Enterprises showed record growth projections, but the numbers swam before his eyes, replaced by images of 4 little boys with his face. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts before the door swung open, without waiting for a response. Wallace Thornton strode in, identical to Maxwell in appearance, but radiating a completely different energy. Where Maxwell was measured and strategic, Wallace was all sharp edges and impatience. You missed the Singapore call, Wallace said, dropping into the chair across from Maxwell's desk. Lee was asking for you specifically. I had to make excuses. Something came up, Maxwell replied vaguely. Wallace narrowed his eyes. Something more important than the 8-figure deal we've been chasing for months? Yes. The simple answer clearly caught Wallace off guard. The twins had built their empire on a shared understanding. Nothing came before business ever. Are you sick? Wallace asked, genuine concern briefly displacing his irritation. Maxwell leaned back, suddenly exhausted by the prospect of explaining. But Wallace wasn't just his brother. He was his business partner, his co-CEO. He deserved to know why one. Half of Thornton Enterprises had suddenly shifted priorities. I saw Victoria yesterday. Wallace's expression darkened immediately. Your ex? What did she want after all these years? Money, I assume. She didn't want anything. I saw her by chance. Maxwell paused, then added quietly, She has children, Wallace. 4 of them. Boys. And? Wallace shrugged. Good for her. She remarried? No. Maxwell met his twins' gaze directly. They're 5 years old, identical quadruplets. They look exactly like us at that age. The implication hung in the air between them. Wallace's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something harder. That's impossible, he finally said. She would have told you. She tried, apparently. 3 times. My assistant blocked the calls. Wallace stood abruptly, pacing the office. Even if they are yours, and that's a big if, where has she been for 5 years? Why show up now? His eyes narrowed. Think about it, Max. We just closed the Barnes merger. Your net worth jumped $2 billion overnight. The timing is suspicious. She didn't show up, Maxwell corrected him. I saw her on the street. She was. He hesitated, knowing how Wallace would interpret the next words. She was asking for money. They've been struggling. Wallace let out a humorless laugh. Of course she was. This is textbook, Max. She hides these kids for years, waits until you're at your wealthiest, then conveniently falls on hard times. It's not like that, Maxwell insisted, an unfamiliar anger rising in his chest. You didn't see them, Wallace. They're living in shelters. Victoria lost her job, her parents died, and you're falling for it, Wallace interrupted, his voice sharp. 5 minutes with her and you're already making excuses. You've always had a blind spot when it comes to Victoria. Maxwell stood, matching his brother's stance. They're my sons. You don't know that. I do. One look at them and there's no question. They're Thorntons. Wallace's expression hardened. Then get a DNA test. If they're really yours, we'll handle it properly. Set up trust funds, arrange appropriate support. But Maxwell, he leaned forward, hands braced on the desk. Don't let her manipulate you into thinking you can play happy. Family after 6 years. The words stung because they touched Maxwell's deepest fear, that he had lost too much time, that he couldn't repair what had been broken. I'm seeing them again tomorrow, he said firmly. I promised. Wallace straightened, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit. Fine. Do what you need to do, but keep your head on straight. Remember everything we've built. He moved toward the door, then paused. And get that DNA test. After Wallace left, Maxwell sank back into his chair, conflict churning inside him. His brother's warnings weren't entirely unreasonable. The business side of Maxwell, the side that had built an empire on calculated risk and strategic thinking, knew he should proceed cautiously. But another part of him, a part long suppressed by ambition and the pursuit of success, rejected the cold analysis. He had held Bryce's small hand, had seen Jaden's protective instinct, had witnessed Wesley's curiosity and Parker's unbridled enthusiasm. He had felt a connection that transcended logic or business strategy. Maxwell picked up his phone and called Victoria's number, which she had reluctantly shared at the park. "Is tomorrow still good?" he asked when she answered. "I thought maybe we could go to the Children's Museum. The boys might enjoy it." There was a pause before Victoria replied, her voice cautious but not unwelcoming. "They'd love that. They've never been." "I'll send a car," Maxwell offered, then caught himself. "Or I could meet you there, whatever you prefer." "We'll meet you there," Victoria said firmly. 10 o'clock? Perfect. As Maxwell hung up, he noticed a text from Wallace. "Called our lawyer. Custody arrangements need to be airtight if confirmed. Don't promise anything yet." Maxwell set the phone down without replying. For the first time in their shared business, history, the brothers were approaching a situation from completely different angles. Wallace saw potential liabilities, legal complications, threats to the empire they'd built. Maxwell just saw his sons. The Children's Museum was awash with color, sound, and movement, a cacophony of childhood joy that would normally have overwhelmed Maxwell Thornton. Today, however, he barely noticed the chaos as he watched his sons, race from exhibit to exhibit with unbridled enthusiasm. "Look, Max, I'm making a tornado," Parker called from the weather station, his small hands manipulating air, currents that swirled inside a tall tube. "That's impressive," Maxwell replied, genuinely amazed at how quickly the boys had warmed to him. He had expected resistance, especially from protective Jaden, but children, he was learning, possessed a remarkable capacity for acceptance. Victoria stood nearby, arms crossed but with a softness to her expression that hadn't been there during their first encounters. "They've never had anyone else show interest in the things they love," she explained quietly. "Their teachers are too overwhelmed with full classrooms, and we don't have extended family." Maxwell felt a familiar pang of guilt. "They should have had me." "Yes," Victoria agreed simply, without accusation. "They should have." Wesley appeared suddenly, tugging at Maxwell's sleeve. "The robot exhibit is opening. Can we go? Please?" "Of course," Maxwell nodded, surprised at how natural it felt to be consulted on such decisions. As they made their way through the museum, Maxwell found himself cataloging each boy's distinct personality. Jaden approached every exhibit methodically, reading instructions before engaging. Wesley asked questions constantly, his mind processing information at remarkable speed. Parker dove in head first, all imagination and instinct. And Bryce, quiet Bryce, observed everything, his brothers, the exhibits, and most keenly, Maxwell himself. "You have the same frown," Bryce commented as they examined a display of simple machines. "What do you mean?" Maxwell asked. "When you're thinking hard," Bryce demonstrated, furrowing his brow in perfect imitation of Maxwell's expression. "Like this. Mommy says I look serious like a little old man." Maxwell laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even him. "My father used to say the same thing about me." "Your father?" Bryce's eyes widened. "You have a father?" The innocent question struck Maxwell silent for a moment. Of course, in Bryce's world, fathers were abstract concepts. People other children had, not him and his brothers. "I did." Maxwell recovered. "He died when I was in college. Your age, though, I look just like you." Bryce seemed to consider this carefully. "Was he nice?" Maxwell hesitated. Richard Thornton had been many things, driven, ambitious, demanding, but nice was rarely a word associated with him. He had pushed his twin sons relentlessly, instilling in them the cutthroat business instincts that later built their empire. "He taught me a lot," Maxwell answered diplomatically. "But I think—" He looked around at the boys, engaged and happy. I think I'd like to be a different kind of father than he was. Before Bryce could follow up with another disarmingly perceptive question, Parker appeared, face flushed with excitement. They have a space lab upstairs. Can we go to space, Max? Please? The afternoon flew by in a whirlwind of exhibits, interactive games, and scientific discoveries. Maxwell found himself fully present in a way he hadn't been in years, perhaps ever. Business calls went to voicemail, emails remained unanswered, and for once, Maxwell Thornton didn't care. When the museum staff announced closing time, 4 disappointed voices protested in unison. "We didn't see the dinosaurs yet," Jaden argued, showing unexpected passion. "Or finish the circuit board," Wesley added. "We can come back another day," Victoria promised, giving Maxwell an uncertain glance. "Definitely," he confirmed immediately. "And maybe next time we could try the Natural History Museum for those dinosaurs." The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement from all 4 boys. As they gathered their things, Maxwell noticed Jaden hanging back, watching him with an unreadable expression. "Everything okay, Jaden?" Maxwell asked, crouching to the boy's level. Jaden twisted his hands together, a gesture so reminiscent of Victoria that Maxwell felt his heart tighten. "Are you just being nice because of Mom?" the boy asked finally, his voice soft but direct. Maxwell blinked, caught off guard by the perceptiveness of the question. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes men are nice to Mom, but then they stop coming around," Jaden explained matter-of-factly. "I don't want my brothers to be sad if you stop coming too." The simple statement hit Maxwell with the force of a physical blow. These boys had already experienced loss and uncertainty. They'd watched their mother struggle, had moved between shelters, had seen potential relationships begin and end. "Jaden," Maxwell said carefully, "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." The boy studied him skeptically. "Pinky promise?" Maxwell solemnly extended his little finger, engulfing Jaden's tiny one as they sealed the pact. "Pinky promise." As they exited the museum, the evening air had grown chilly. Maxwell noticed the boys' jackets were too thin for the season, another sign of Victoria's financial struggles. "Let me take you all to dinner," Maxwell suggested. "There's a great pizza place nearby that I think the boys would love." Victoria hesitated, that familiar pride warring in her eyes. "Max, please," he said softly. "It would make me happy." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded. The boys cheered, and as they walked toward the restaurant, Maxwell felt Jaden's small hand slip into his own, a gesture of trust that meant more than any business deal he'd ever closed. Later, watching the boys devour slices of pizza, their faces animated as they recounted their favorite museum exhibits, Maxwell made a decision. These children deserved stability, comfort, opportunities, all the things his wealth could provide. But more importantly, they deserved a father who was present, engaged, and putting them first. Whatever it took, whatever Wallace thought, whatever complications arose, Maxwell Thornton was all in. "They're definitely yours," Wallace said flatly, tossing the DNA test results onto Maxwell's desk. "Congratulations, you're the father of quadruplets. The legal team is drawing up child support arrangements." Maxwell picked up the paper, though he hardly needed scientific confirmation of what his heart had known from the first moment he saw the boys. He had only agreed to the test to silence Wallace's suspicions. "This isn't about child support," Maxwell said quietly, setting the results aside. "I want to be in their lives, really in their lives." Wallace sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair, a gesture identical to Maxwell's own habit when stressed. "You barely know them. Victoria kept them from you for 5 years. Are you really going to upend your entire life based on a few days with them?" "Yes," Maxwell answered without hesitation. The certainty in his voice seemed to catch Wallace off. Guard for 2 weeks now, Maxwell had spent every available moment with Victoria and the boys. Museum visits had led to playground afternoons, which had evolved into regular dinners and even a Saturday at the Bronx Zoo. Each interaction cemented his determination to be the father these boys deserved. What about the Tokyo expansion? Wallace pressed. The board meeting next week? The investor conference? You've built this company from nothing, and now you're ready to walk away for a ready-made family that didn't include you until now? Maxwell met his twin's gaze steadily. I'm not walking away from the company, I'm adjusting my priorities, Wallace scoffed. Same thing in this business, and you know it. Before Maxwell could respond, his phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. Can we talk? Alone. Coffee shop near the museum at 3? Maxwell felt a flutter of apprehension. Victoria had been gradually warming to his presence in their lives, but she remained guarded, particularly when they weren't with the boys. I need to go, he told Wallace, standing. The Johnson portfolio needs your approval by end of day, Wallace reminded him, frustration evident. It'll have to wait, Maxwell replied, already heading for the door. The coffee shop was quiet in the mid-afternoon lull. Victoria sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a mug, her expression serious. Maxwell slid into the seat across from her, trying to read her mood. Thank you for meeting me, she began formally. Of course, Maxwell replied. Is everything all right? The boys, they're fine, she assured him quickly. They're at their half-day program. That's why I wanted to talk now. Victoria took a deep breath, seeming to gather her thoughts. The boys are getting attached to you, Max. Very attached. Wesley asked last night if you could come live with us. Maxwell couldn't suppress the surge of hope her words triggered. And how would you feel about that? Victoria's eyes snapped to his. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to tell you that you need to be certain about this. About them. They've had enough disappointment in their lives. I've never been more certain of anything, Maxwell said firmly. You say that now, Victoria countered. But this is still new. The novelty of fatherhood, the excitement of discovery. What happens when it gets hard? When they're sick or fighting or struggling in school? When being their father interferes with closing a big deal? Her words stung, but Maxwell recognized the fear behind them. You don't think I'm committed? I think, Victoria said carefully, that you've lived a particular way for a long time. Success, wealth, freedom, these have been your priorities. Parenthood is different. I know that. Do you? Her voice softened. Max, you missed 5 years because we both made mistakes. I should have tried harder to tell you. You should have been more accessible, but we can't change that now. No, Maxwell agreed. We can't. But I can change what happens next. Victoria studied him, her expression unreadable. The boys need stability, they need promises kept. They need a father who shows up not just when it's fun and easy, but when it's hard and messy. I want to be that father, Maxwell insisted. I want to know everything, their favorite foods, their nightmares, their hopes. I want to help with homework and teach them to ride bikes and be there when they're sick. Something in Victoria's expression shifted. And what does Wallace think of all this? Maxwell stiffened slightly. Wallace's opinion doesn't matter. It does if he's going to be in their lives too. He's their uncle. Wallace is adjusting to the idea, Maxwell admitted. He's concerned about what this means for the business. Victoria nodded as if this confirmed something. And a week ago, wouldn't you have had the same concern? The question hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. Yes, Maxwell acknowledged. But seeing them, knowing them, changes everything. Victoria was quiet for a moment, turning her mug slowly between her palms. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Anything. Are you doing this because you feel guilty? Because if that's what's driving you, it won't last. Maxwell considered her question carefully. The instinctive answer was no. But Victoria deserved more than instinct. At first, maybe guilt was part of it, he admitted. But now? Now it's because I look at them and see everything I never knew I wanted. I see 4 incredible boys who somehow managed to be exactly like me and nothing like me at the same time. I see second chances. He reached across the table, tentatively covering her hand with his own. And I see you, Victoria, raising our sons with strength and grace despite everything. I see the family we could have been, could still be. Victoria withdrew her hand gently, but her expression had softened. The boys have a career day at their program next week. They've been asking if you could come. If you're serious about them, that would be a good place to start. Maxwell felt his heart swell. What time? 9 o'clock. It's nothing fancy. Just parents talking about their jobs. I'll be there, he promised. And Victoria, thank you. For raising them, for keeping them safe, for being the parent I wasn't able to be. Victoria's eyes glistened slightly as she stood to leave. 9 o'clock, Max, don't be late. As Maxwell watched her go, he knew that Wallace was wrong. He wasn't throwing away everything he'd built. He was finally understanding why he'd built it in the first place. And this is what we call a balance sheet, Maxwell explained, kneeling beside Wesley as the boy examined the simplified financial document with intense concentration. It shows everything a company owns and owes. Like our chore chart? Wesley asked, adjusting his small glasses. Mom puts stickers when we do our jobs and then we get allowance. Maxwell smiled. Exactly like that, just with bigger numbers. Career day at the boys' program had been a success beyond Maxwell's expectations. He'd arrived nervous, clutching a presentation he'd spent all night preparing. One that explained investment banking at a 5-year-old level, complete with colorful charts and simple analogies. To his surprise, the boys had proudly introduced him to their teachers and classmates. This is our friend Max, he runs a company. The term friend had stung slightly, but Maxwell understood Victoria's caution. They still hadn't told the boys who he really was. Each day that passed made the conversation more necessary and more daunting. Can we have mac and cheese tonight? Parker asked, bouncing on his knees beside Maxwell. The boys had insisted he stay for dinner after Victoria picked them up from their program. If that's what you'd like, Victoria replied from the kitchen of their small apartment. The place was clean but sparse, with second-hand furniture and walls bare except for the boys' artwork. Maxwell had offered financial help multiple times, but Victoria remained resistant, accepting only his contributions to the boys' education fund. I can help, Maxwell offered, rising from the floor where he'd been surrounded by curious boys and financial documents. Victoria looked surprised but nodded. You can grate the cheese. Working side by side in the tiny kitchen, Maxwell found himself studying Victoria's profile. The past few weeks had softened the tension between them, replacing it with something more complicated. Not the love they once shared, but perhaps the foundation for a different kind of relationship, one built around their sons. You were good with them today, Victoria said quietly, stirring the pasta. Wesley wouldn't stop talking about assets and liabilities afterward. Maxwell chuckled. He's brilliant. They all are. They get that from you, she acknowledged, especially Wesley. He's been taking things apart since he could hold a screwdriver, trying to understand how they work. And Jaden's leadership, Parker's creativity, Bryce's observation skills, they're all such distinct people despite looking identical. Victoria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. It was terrifying when they were babies. I couldn't tell them apart for weeks. I used color-coded socks. The casual mention of their infancy hung in the air between them, another reminder of all Maxwell had missed. Before he could respond, Jaden appeared in the kitchen doorway. Is dinner ready? We're hungry. 5 more minutes, Victoria promised. Go wash your hands and get your brothers to do the same. Jaden hurried off, and Maxwell heard the immediate sounds of brotherly commands being issued. He's going to be a CEO someday, Maxwell observed, just like his father. Victoria gave him a sidelong glance. Is that what you want for them? To follow in your footsteps? I want them to be happy, Maxwell answered honestly, whatever that means for each of them. Dinner was a chaotic affair, with 4 excited boys talking over each other, sharing stories from their day, and occasionally flicking macaroni when they thought no one was looking. Maxwell found himself laughing more freely than he had in years. The weight of Thornton Enterprises temporarily lifted from his shoulders. After dinner, the boys begged Maxwell to read their bedtime story. Victoria hesitated only briefly before nodding her permission. As Maxwell settled into a chair with a well-worn storybook, all 4 boys somehow managed to cram themselves around him, small bodies pressed against his sides. This one's my favorite, Parker announced, pointing to a story about a dragon. Mine too, Maxwell agreed, surprised to find his voice thick with emotion. By the third page, Bryce had fallen asleep against his shoulder, and Parker's eyelids were drooping. Maxwell kept reading, his voice soft, acutely aware of the trust these small humans had placed in him. When the story ended, Victoria helped corral the sleepy boys to bed. Maxwell stood in the doorway, watching as she tucked each one in with practiced efficiency, pressing kisses to 4 foreheads and adjusting 4 sets of covers. "Good night, Max," Wesley called sleepily. "See you tomorrow?" Jaden asked, the question carrying more weight than the simple words suggested. "Of course," Maxwell promised. "Sleep well, boys." Back in the living room, Victoria handed Maxwell a cup of tea. "They've never settled down that easily before. You have a magic touch." "Hardly," Maxwell smiled. "But thank you for letting me be part of it." Victoria sat across from him, her expression turning serious. "We need to tell them, Max, soon. They're asking questions I'm struggling to answer." Maxwell nodded. "I agree. When do you think would be best?" "This weekend?" Victoria suggested. "We could take them to the park, somewhere comfortable for them, and explain it together." "Together," Maxwell repeated, liking the sound of it. "I'd like that." As he prepared to leave, Maxwell found himself reluctant to return to his empty penthouse. Here, in this small apartment with mismatched furniture and crayon drawings on the refrigerator, he had found something his wealth had never been able to buy: belonging. "Maxwell," Victoria said as she walked him to the door, "they're going to have a lot of questions about why you weren't there before, about whether you're staying. We need to be united in our answers." "I'm not going anywhere, Victoria," Maxwell assured her. "Whatever happens between us, I'm their father. Always." She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Good night, Max." "Good night." As Maxwell stepped into the hall, he heard the patter of small feet behind him. Turning, he found Bryce in his pajamas, clutching a small plush dinosaur. "You forgot something," the boy said solemnly, holding out a folded piece of paper. Maxwell knelt down, accepting the offering. "What's this?" "A picture of our family," Bryce explained. "For your house, so you won't be lonely." Maxwell unfolded the paper to find a crayon drawing of 5 stick figures, 4 small ones and 1 tall one. All had the same blue eyes and dark hair. "It's perfect," Maxwell whispered, gathering Bryce in a gentle hug. "Thank you." As Victoria ushered a sleepy Bryce back to bed, Maxwell carefully placed the drawing in his inside jacket pocket, close to his heart. It was the most valuable thing he now possessed. Saturday dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day. Maxwell arrived at the entrance to Central Park with his stomach in knots. Today was the day his sons would learn who he really was. His phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from Wallace about the upcoming board meeting, but Maxwell had silenced it. Nothing was more important than this moment. Victoria was already waiting with the boys, who raced toward him the moment they spotted him. "Max," Parker called, launching himself forward for a hug that Maxwell gratefully returned. "We brought a soccer ball and a frisbee," Jaden added, holding it up proudly. "Excellent choices," Maxwell smiled, looking over their heads to meet Victoria's gaze. She gave him a small nod, her expression a mix of nervousness and resolution. They found a quiet spot near the conservatory garden, less crowded than other areas of the park. The boys immediately wanted to play, but Victoria called them back. "First, we need to talk about something important," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Then we can play all afternoon." The boys exchanged glances, sensing the shift in mood. They settled on the blanket Victoria had spread out, cross-legged and expectant. Maxwell sat beside Victoria, his heart pounding so hard he was certain everyone could hear it. "Boys," Victoria began carefully, "remember how you've asked me about your dad before? About why you don't have one like some of your friends do?" 4 heads nodded in unison, suddenly completely focused. "Well," Victoria continued, taking a deep breath, "everyone has a father. Even if they don't always know them or live with them, Like Tommy from school, Wesley commented. His dad lives in Chicago. That's right, Victoria nodded. Sometimes parents live in different places but are still both important. She glanced at Maxwell, a silent signal that it was his turn. Maxwell cleared his throat, feeling simultaneously terrified and completely certain. The truth is, he said gently, you do have a father. You've always had one. He just didn't know about you until recently. The boys looked confused, glancing between the adults with furrowed brows. Your father didn't know you were born, Victoria explained. That was my fault. I didn't tell him. But now he knows, and he wants very much to be part of your lives. Bryce, always the most perceptive, was the first to understand. His blue eyes, so like Maxwell's own, widened as he stared at the man sitting across from him. Is it you? He asked softly. Are you our dad? The simple question hung in the air. Maxwell felt his throat tighten as he nodded. Yes, Bryce, I'm your father. Silence fell over the group as 4 identical faces processed this revelation. Maxwell held his breath, terrified of rejection, of anger, of confusion too complicated for 5-year-olds to navigate. Wesley, logical as always, was the next to speak. That's why we look like you. Yes, Maxwell confirmed. That's why. Jaden frowned, his protective instincts visibly engaged. Why didn't you find us before? He demanded, a hint of accusation in his voice. I didn't know about you, Maxwell explained gently. If I had, I would have been there from the very beginning. I would have been at every birthday, every first day of school, every moment. Your father and I made mistakes, Victoria added, placing a reassuring hand on Jaden's shoulder. Adult mistakes, but none of those mistakes change how much we both love you. Parker, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly launched himself at Maxwell, wrapping his arms around his neck. I knew it, he exclaimed. I told Bryce you had to be somebody important to us. Maxwell hugged him back, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. You are the most important people in the world to me, he managed to say. Bryce moved next, silently joining the hug. Wesley followed, adjusting his glasses before pressing himself against Maxwell's side. Only Jaden remained apart, watching with conflicted eyes. It's okay to need time, Jaden, Victoria said softly. This is big news. The boy twisted his hands together, that gesture so like his mother's, and looked directly at Maxwell. If you're our dad, does that mean you're staying forever? Not just visiting? Maxwell held the boy's gaze steadily. Forever, he promised. Nothing could keep me away now that I've found you. Jaden considered this, his 5-year-old face solemn with the weight of decision. Finally, he nodded once and moved forward, completing the circle of small arms around Maxwell. Maxwell closed his eyes, holding his sons, all 4 of them, for the first time as their father. The feeling was indescribable, a completion he hadn't known he was missing until this moment. When they finally broke apart, Parker immediately had questions. Can we call you Dad now? He asked eagerly. I'd like that very much, Maxwell answered, his voice rough with emotion. Does this mean you'll come to my soccer game on Tuesday? Wesley wanted to know. Wouldn't miss it for anything, Maxwell assured him. Do you have toys at your house? Bryce inquired practically. Maxwell laughed. Not yet, but we can fix that. Victoria watched the exchange with glistening eyes, relief evident in her posture. Whatever she had feared, rejection, confusion, anger, hadn't materialized. Instead, their sons had accepted the truth with the remarkable resilience of childhood. As promised, they spent the afternoon playing soccer and frisbee, stopping for hot dogs from a vendor and ice cream cones that dripped sticky trails down small fingers. Through it all, Maxwell found himself repeatedly pulled into the moment by cries of, Dad, watch this, or Dad, your turn, each use of the word filling him with joy. Late afternoon sun was slanting through the trees when they finally packed up to leave. The boys were exhausted but happy, buzzing with new possibilities. Can we see Dad's house? Wesley asked as they walked toward the park exit. Victoria and Maxwell exchanged glances. Soon, Victoria promised. We're taking things one step at a time. As they prepared to part ways, the boys and Victoria to their apartment, Maxwell to his penthouse, Jaden approached him, hanging back from his brothers. I have a question, he said seriously. Since you're our dad, does that mean you and Mom will live together like Tommy's parents do after his dad moved back from Chicago? Maxwell knelt to meet Jaden's eyes, acutely aware of Victoria hovering nearby. I don't know what the future holds, Jaden, he answered honestly, but I do know that your mom and I both love you more than anything, and we're going to work together to take care of you no matter what. Jaden seemed to accept this answer, nodding solemnly before rejoining his brothers. Thank you, Victoria said quietly as the boys ran ahead, for being honest with him. With all of them. Maxwell watched his sons, his heart full. It's the foundation they deserve, he replied simply. Truth, trust, and the knowledge that they are loved beyond measure. Maxwell, Thornton had never been more exhausted or more fulfilled in his life. 2 weeks after revealing his identity to his sons, he found himself juggling board meetings and bedtime stories, investor calls and soccer practice. He had made good on his promise to attend Wesley's soccer game, much to Wallace's frustration when he rescheduled a major client meeting to do so. Daddy, is this right? Parker asked, holding up his math homework with pride. They were gathered in Victoria's small living room, the boys sprawled across the floor with their schoolwork while Maxwell helped where needed. Let me see, Maxwell said, examining Parker's neat numbers. Perfect. You're a natural with addition. The simple domestic scene still felt surreal. In a few short weeks, Maxwell had gone from solitary billionaire to hands-on father of quadruplets. The transition hadn't been seamless. He still had moments of panic when faced with tasks Victoria handled with practiced ease. But he was learning. When, "Can we see your house?" Bryce asked for perhaps the 20th time that week. Maxwell glanced at Victoria, who was watching from the kitchen doorway. They had been cautiously navigating co-parenting, establishing boundaries and routines that worked for everyone. Actually, Victoria said, surprising Maxwell, I was thinking this weekend might work if your father is free. Really? Maxwell couldn't hide his delight. Victoria had been hesitant to let the boys visit his penthouse, concerned about the stark contrast between their modest life and Maxwell's luxury. She nodded. They need to know all parts of your life just like you're learning about theirs. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Maxwell lingered in the kitchen helping Victoria clean up. Thank you, he said quietly, for letting them visit the penthouse. I know you're worried about the differences in our lifestyles. Victoria wiped her hands on a dish towel, her expression thoughtful. They're Thorntons too, Max. I can't pretend that part of them doesn't exist. She smiled slightly. Besides, Jaden has decided he's going to be a businessman like his dad. He put on Wesley's glasses yesterday and pretended to make business calls. Maxwell laughed, warmth spreading through his chest at the image. Wallace would be pleased. He's been asking when he can meet them. Victoria's smile faded. Wallace, he still doesn't trust me, does he? Wallace doesn't trust anyone, Maxwell replied honestly. But he'll come around when he meets them. How could he not? As Maxwell prepared to leave, Jaden appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleepy eyes. Dad, are you leaving? Maxwell's heart still skipped at being called Dad. He knelt down, smoothing Jaden's tousled hair. Just going home for tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow after school. Jaden nodded, suddenly wrapping his arms around Maxwell's neck. Love you, Dad, he mumbled against Maxwell's shoulder. I love you too, buddy, Maxwell whispered, holding his son tight. More than you'll ever know. They're absolutely charming, Wallace Thornton said, swirling his scotch as he paced Maxwell's office. Particularly Wesley. The boy's mind is remarkable. Maxwell studied his twin cautiously. Wallace had finally met the quadruplets during their weekend visit to the penthouse, and his reaction had been surprisingly positive, on the surface. They liked you too, Maxwell replied. Bryce hasn't stopped talking about Uncle Wallace's magic tricks. Wallace smiled thinly. Children are easily impressed. He set down his glass with precision. Have you considered my proposal regarding their education? Phillips Academy has an exceptional elementary program. They're 5, Wallace, and they're settled in their current school. A public school in Brooklyn, Wallace scoffed. Hardly befitting Thornton heirs. Maxwell tensed. Victoria and I make decisions about the boys together. Ah yes, Victoria. Wallace's expression darkened. Tell me, brother, have you considered that she might be playing a longer game? First custody, then marriage, then half the company? That's enough, Maxwell snapped. Victoria isn't after my money. Wallace's phone buzzed. He checked it and smiled. We'll see. My investigator just delivered his report on your ex-wife. You might find it illuminating. Maxwell stared at the folder Wallace had left on his desk, his hand hovering over it without touching, as if it might burn him. Inside were the illuminating findings Wallace's private investigator had uncovered about Victoria. Part of him wanted to throw it away unopened. Another part needed to know. The door to his office opened and his assistant appeared. Mr. Thornton, the board is waiting in the conference room. Mr. Wallace says they can't delay any longer. Maxwell nodded absently, his focus still on the folder. The Tokyo expansion meeting, the one he'd helped plan for months, was starting without him. Meanwhile, he'd promised to attend Bryce's art show at school in 30 minutes. His phone buzzed, with a text from Victoria. The boys are so excited you're coming, Bryce has been watching the door. In that moment, clarity washed over Maxwell. He stood, straightening his tie, and left the folder untouched on his desk. Tell the board I won't be attending, he told his shocked assistant. Family emergency. And tell Wallace he can handle the presentation himself. As Maxwell walked out, choosing his sons over the empire he'd spent decades building, he felt lighter than he had in years. Some choices, he was learning, weren't really choices at all. You missed the most important board meeting of the quarter to attend a kindergarten art show? Wallace stood in Maxwell's penthouse doorway, his identical face contorted with rage. The Tokyo investors are reconsidering. Maxwell remained calm. Bryce won first place for his drawing. The theme was My Family. He drew all of us, including you. Wallace's jaw tightened. While you're playing Happy Family, I'm left saving our company. He thrust the investigator's folder at Maxwell. You should know what she's doing. Maxwell opened it reluctantly. Inside were photos of Victoria meeting with a lawyer, copies of custody paperwork being prepared, seeking full legal custody of the Quadruplets. She filed these the day after I met the boys, Wallace said. Still think she's not after your money? Maxwell studied the documents, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. Then he noticed the date stamps and something clicked. These are from 3 weeks ago, Maxwell said slowly. Before I told her I wanted to be in their lives permanently. Wallace scoffed. So she never filed them, Maxwell realized. She was protecting the boys until she knew I was serious. Any mother would have done the same. The brothers locked eyes, decades of shared history, but vastly different priorities between them. Choose, Maxwell, Wallace finally said. The company or them. You can't have both. I choose them, Maxwell said without hesitation, watching shock register on his twin's face. And if that means stepping back from Thornton Enterprises, so be it. The days that followed were transformative. Maxwell restructured his role at the company, delegating responsibilities and reducing his hours. Wallace remained coldly professional, but the rift between them was evident to everyone. When Maxwell showed Victoria the custody paperwork that Wallace had uncovered, she didn't deny it. I was scared, she admitted. You appeared out of nowhere after 5 years. I needed to protect them. I understand, Maxwell replied, surprising himself with how sincerely he meant it. I would have done the same. They created a formal co-parenting agreement together, one that acknowledged both their rights and responsibilities. Maxwell helped Victoria find a job at a respected design firm and a better apartment, always careful to support without overwhelming. One evening, as Maxwell pushed the boys on swings at a playground near their new home, Wallace appeared unexpectedly. He watched silently for several minutes before approaching. Wesley has your analytical mind, he observed quietly. And Jaden? He reminds me of us at that age. Maxwell nodded, sensing an olive branch being extended. They need their uncle, Maxwell said simply. If he's willing to be a part of their lives on their terms, not his. Wallace's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I might be able to manage that. The backyard of Maxwell's recently purchased Brooklyn brownstone was transformed into a wonderland of streamers, balloons, and 4 identical 6 signs. The Quadruplets' birthday party was in full swing, with children running and shouting in the afternoon sun, while parents chatted nearby. Maxwell stood at the grill, expertly flipping burgers while keeping one eye on his sons. Careful, Parker, he called as the most adventurous of his boys climbed higher on the playset. Parker gave him a thumbs up without slowing his ascent. Victoria appeared beside Maxwell, carrying a tray of condiments. He'll be fine. They all have your stubbornness. And your resilience, Maxwell added with a smile. The past year had brought changes no one could have predicted. Maxwell had relocated from his Manhattan penthouse to Brooklyn, just 3 blocks from Victoria's apartment. Thornton Enterprises continued to thrive, though Maxwell's role had evolved to allow him to be home for dinner with his sons most nights. Wallace, to everyone's surprise, had become a devoted uncle, showing up regularly with educational toys and taking a special interest in Wesley's budding interest in business. Uncle Wallace is teaching me about stocks, Wesley announced proudly, adjusting his new glasses as he approached the grill. He says I can start my own portfolio when I'm 7. Of course he does, Victoria laughed, ruffling Wesley's hair. As the party continued, Maxwell found himself watching Victoria. She was flourishing at her new design firm, regaining the confidence that had drawn him to her years ago. Their relationship had evolved too, not romantic, but a deep partnership built on mutual respect and shared love for their sons. Later, as the boys gathered around their cake, Maxwell caught Victoria's eye across the candle glow. She smiled, and something unspoken passed between them. After the guests departed and the boys were occupied with new toys, Maxwell took Victoria's hand and led her to a quiet corner of the yard. These past months have taught me what truly matters, he said softly. Not wealth or power or business success, but family, connection, love. Victoria nodded. The boys are thriving with you in their lives. We all are. Maxwell took a deep breath. I'm not asking for a reunion or making assumptions, but I'd like us to consider a future where we could be a more consolidated family. For the boys, and maybe for us too. Victoria's eyes glistened in the fading light. I think, she said carefully, that might be something worth exploring. From the patio door, 4 identical faces watched their parents with hopeful smiles. See? Bryce whispered to his brothers. I told you our birthday wish would come true.